The exploitation of crises, or the creation of crises and emergencies, or new wars of choice, whether they be economic wars or kinetic wars, cold wars or hot wars, they use these events to try to stoke fear in the people, to force us into submission, and use the power of the national security state and law enforcement to infringe on our rights and liberties, and to force us to face consequences if we refuse to submit. James Madison warned us about this when he said, of all the enemies to public liberty, war is perhaps the most to be dreaded because it comprises and develops the germ of every other. He said, no nation could preserve its freedom in the midst of continual warfare. That's what we have seen through most of my adult life. It's what I have experienced as a soldier in seeing the cost and consequences of war. Yes, in human lives. Yes, in taxpayer dollars. And also in the cost of the violation of our rights and freedoms. You know, when I served in Congress, I served on the Armed Services and Foreign Affairs Committees for most of the 8 years that I was there. And I was astounded by the fact that every time the Patriot Act reauthorization came up, there were those of us, myself, Tom Massey, and others who recognized how deeply these laws had been violated and abused in the name of national security to go after our individual liberties. And so we introduced legislation to fix this egregious problem, this unconstitutional abuse of power. And every time we did so, there was a bipartisan response calling us traitors, accusing us of welcoming another 9/11 style terrorist attack on America, further fomenting this fear in order to hide what they were really doing. We saw egregious overreach during the COVID pandemic, where the government attempted to, and in many cases were successful in controlling even the most personal parts of our lives, and they continued to ratchet up those measures of control because they saw they could get away with it. They saw there was no accountability, there was no consequences. They saw how they could smear and shut down and silence anyone who dared not only to challenge them, but to merely ask questions. And we're seeing the same thing play out now. We have 2 new Cold Wars being waged against Russia and China. They're working with their friends in the propaganda media and in big tech to push their own narrative, but also to undermine the free speech and rights of anyone who dares to ask the questions every one of us should be asking as Americans, the questions every member of Congress should be asking. What is the true cost of these wars? How will they impact the everyday lives of the American people? How do they serve the best interests of the American people?